Hi everyone, and welcome back to Lemon Dew. I'm Brie, and in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about autism and toxic friendships. Not only am I going to be discussing some of the toxic friendships I've had in the past, I'm also going to be discussing the type of friendships I have now, as well as other types of friendships I used to have, at least with certain individuals that I unfortunately lost contact with over the years. So, without further ado, let's begin. So, coming from my experience as an autistic individual, I've had many difficulties trying to maintain friendships, primarily because of autistic traits such as my inability to understand jokes and other social cues, and also because of personal interests I used to have. So, for example, in primary school, I used to have a fascination for fairies and was often made fun of due to this interest. I only ever had one close friend when I was a primary school student, and we used to go to each other's houses to hang out after school and often talked to each other on a regular basis over the phone. Although I still occasionally keep in contact with this individual, many things have changed in terms of personal lives. So they are studying and working, I'm working, and I guess when it comes to maintaining friendships in certain cases due to personal responsibilities, sometimes it's kind of hard to meet up when schedules can be different, if that makes sense. I would definitely say that most of my toxic friendships existed in secondary school. So even though I did have different friendship groups that I would be seen with, I cut contact with quite a lot of people, mainly because of certain issues that I came across. So, like primary school, I was bullied for certain interests. So, I remember I used to like Vocaloid songs, and there was this one particular Vocaloid character that I was obsessed with, which was Len Kagamine. And a lot of people used to make fun of me for that. And on top of that, I was also made fun of for liking anime as well as K-pop because I didn't really like the same things as other people. And I guess when other people would talk about certain interests like boy bands and such, I just didn't really see the appeal, if that made sense, I guess. And on top of that, I was made fun of for being too sensitive. So, I often cried a lot because I'm a very emotional person and I'm very sensitive even now. And I guess because of this, I often had this ability to try to mask my emotions. So even now, I am slowly trying to learn to be okay with expressing how I feel. And I guess the reason I don't do that is because I've had instances in the past, which I've mentioned in previous episodes, where people have often criticized me for being too emotional. So that's why I mask how I truly feel half the time, especially when I'm depressed, which, to be honest, I have been quite recently because of PMS and such. So, if my voice sounds different, that's why. But going back to the actual topic, I often kept certain interests to myself when I was in secondary school, and it wasn't until college and university, really, where the friendships I had changed and I could actually express myself and feel more accepted as me. So back in secondary school, the first toxic friendship I experienced was in year 7. So I used to hang out with a group of Muslim girls, and there were 3 of them, 2 of which were in my form class and another who was a year above that was the sibling of one of the 2 girls. Now, by default, I felt like a third wheel because the 2 girls that I hung out with in my form knew each other since primary school. And I guess because I was kind of the new girl coming into the group, one of the girls in particular had an issue with me because I was getting along with her friend quite well, and I guess they felt threatened by that. I remember having experiences where this particular individual would often tell me all the things that were wrong with my personality, such as being too quiet or having a habit of repeating myself, which is a form of echolalia, which I couldn't help. And there were a couple of instances as well where I would join the group for lunch or even just the small breaks that we had in the morning, and I would be told to go somewhere else because they would be talking about something, and I had no idea that they were really talking about me behind my back, which was something that really bothered me because if there was an issue, I would have rather been told directly, because for me personally, if someone has an issue with me, I would rather you be honest and just tell me what it is instead of hiding behind my back, because it kind of shows that there's a two-faced nature, which is something that I didn't like. And I think that was what really bothered me with this particular individual who also used to bully me, was the fact that they had this fake nice personality. So they appeared to be friendly in front of teachers, and they also had a habit of talking about others behind their backs. And it wasn't just myself, but there were also other girls that had a similar experience with this individual. And by the time I got into year 9, I do remember moving to another full class because I felt uncomfortable being around this person, and I just kind of felt like the odd one out in a sense, even in my entire form, because most of the girls that I used to be friends with were in different form classes, and I couldn't really see them often unless I had breaks or lunch, and that was it. So I often switched friendship groups quite a lot, and I guess it was because I was trying to find a place where I could belong for a change rather than just being the lonely person, if that makes sense. So I remember back in year 9 up until year 10, there was another group that I frequently surrounded myself with. So there were 2 girls that I befriended when I moved to my new form class back then. One of them was white and ginger, the other was Muslim, and we actually had a very close, tight-knit friendship group. And I think looking back at the whole thing, we related to each other because we had quite a few mental health issues that were similar in a sense. So all of us had experienced depression in some way, mainly due to issues relating to school. And we all experienced bullying as well. And, we actually used to hang out quite often during breaks, and we used to talk to each other through instant messaging services like Skype or Kik or even Uvu. But with the Muslim girl that was in this group, I knew her the longest, so even when we left school, which was at different times, we had a 10 plus year friendship. But that sort of disintegrated in 2022, which of course I will explain in more detail. Now, as for the ginger girl that I used to be friends with as well, I was friends with them until 2015, so she never really did anything to me. I think what had changed was our personal lives, really, because I started college in late 2015 and they were at a point where they weren't really doing much with their life. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I think from what I'm aware, this person became a NEET, which is somebody who is not in any form of education, employment or training. So they dropped out of secondary school and didn't really finish their education and just kind of developed quite a lot of mental health issues like social anxiety, and nowadays they just more or less spend their days at home because the social anxiety is pretty bad. It's to a point where they don't really go out. Unfortunately, I haven't really contacted this person since 2015. But then again, I did somehow get back in contact in 2020 when the Muslim girl that we all used to be friends with made like a group for us. But the whole thing felt a bit awkward because I hadn't really heard from this person in so long, and I wasn't really sure what to say really, because I guess I was kind of at a stage where I started to move on with my life. I mean, I was going to university, looking for another job, that kind of thing. Now, with the Muslim girl that I used to be friends with, that was up until 2022, I never realised it then, but she had some very toxic qualities, mainly in terms of pressuring me into doing things that I didn't really feel comfortable with, such as being dared to drink some alcohol from my mum's wine rack when I was 15. And there was one particular incident that I recall back in year 9, and this incident, I guess, looking back, should have made me realise some of the red flags that came up. So they got hit with a rounder's bat by another girl who was high functioning autistic like myself, and I was friends with this other girl as well, and I was friends with the Muslim girl too. And I guess with this particular situation, things just kind of went downhill because a simple mistake, a simple accident turned into like a petty argument over nothing. And at this time, I was in 2 friendship groups that were separate from each other. And the one friendship group that I used to be a part of, I guess I was no longer in that one because I was defending the Muslim girl who basically overreacted over a simple situation. And, you know, I remember in the other friendship group I used to be a part of, I was accused of calling one girl a porn star or something, which I wouldn't have done anyway because I'm a non-confrontational person. And then another girl in this group also told me to kill myself. And yes, at the time, I sent a message to that individual, which was quite nasty. I don't really remember what it was because it was years ago, but I never went along the lines of telling the individual that they should go kill themselves. And I guess at that point, I just kind of, you know, disconnected from that particular group. And with the autistic girl that accidentally hit the Muslim girl with the rounders bat, I am friends with her now. So obviously, you know, I did apologise for defending the other girl in the first place, especially because I was defending a person who had bully-like tendencies, which I didn't realise at the time. And even though I didn't necessarily participate in much, I did feel like shit, especially because I do remember when this girl, the autistic girl I'm referring to, was walking up the stairs just going to the languages area. Myself and the other 2 girls I was with were laughing, and she was almost reduced to tears, and I kind of watched her go and just felt like crap that day because I know what it feels like to be bullied, and I didn't want to be that kind of person. So that was why I apologised, even though I didn't necessarily call the girl names or anything like that. I apologised back then because obviously I felt like crap. And I guess, you know, looking back at this particular incident, with autism and my teen years, I think I had a sort of naive behaviour, if that makes sense, because I often trusted the wrong people, and I think I befriended the wrong people. So with this Muslim girl in particular, there were certain qualities which made her a bad influence, and my year leader, who I didn't like back then, was actually right about this person, but I suppose there's bias because obviously I was friends with this person. I didn't like my year leader at the time due to some issues that I had, as I used to have issues with the education system as a whole. But when it came to this one thing, they were right. And with this particular individual, again referring to the Muslim girl, I actually had instances where I felt like I had to be a therapist for them. So, what I mean by this was that they had a habit of getting into too many issues, and they also expected me to tell them what to do with their life. And I'm not going to go into details in regards to the issues they were dealing with, because those issues are theirs, and in a sense, I kind of feel like I'd be disrespectful for airing out someone else's problems. But, to put things in layman's terms as best as I can, they had instances where they would be around the wrong people. There was an inability to take responsibility for finances, etc., etc. And every time I would try to give realistic advice and be honest, I was told I was being negative. So to me, it felt like I could never be honest with this person, because every bit of honesty that I would try to give would be met with criticism. So I would have to be delusional and, feed lies in order to try to maintain a friendship. And I felt like there were instances as well where I had my own issues, and I never felt like they were there for me as much as I was there for them, because there were times where I used to be the one staying up at late hours because they were going through personal issues. But then the same thing wasn't reciprocated, if that makes sense. So, I was always the type of person that would put my issues aside to help someone else, because I guess, I have a sympathetic nature. And if a friend has problems, I usually want to try to support them as much as I can. And that's what I was trying to do. But there were times where I would try to express my issues and I could never get a word in edgeways. So there was this whole self-centered nature that this girl had, and it changed a lot. So I saw the changes when they moved to the US. They were becoming more materialistic, more selfish, and I got to a point where I had to distance myself because I just felt like I was dealing with so much in one day, if that makes sense. Now in 2022, this friendship ended after a simple misunderstanding because somebody that we used to attend school with, that we were friends with, wanted me to give their phone number to them because of an urgent situation. And of course I did give the phone number out because, due to my concerned nature, I assumed that the Muslim girl was in a serious situation. So I assumed something serious had happened, and I was at a point where I was also grieving because a couple of months back, one of my cousins, who was one of the closest family members in my life, was murdered. So I was in a stage where I was freshly grieving and not really in the right state of mind. And of course I did tell the Muslim girl what I did and why I did it, because I am going to be honest. I'm not just going to hide anything. And then they basically got mad at me because I gave the person their phone number. And I explained to them that I wasn't trying to do anything out of malicious intention. I was trying to be a form of support because I assumed that something was seriously wrong. So they got mad at me, and even though they knew I wouldn't intentionally give their contact details to someone, they basically couldn't trust me anymore, which in a sense I would understand. But then again, there were instances where they made me feel guilty for trying to do something out of the kindness of my heart. And one thing I noticed as well was when they found out that my cousin was murdered, only once did they really ask me how I was doing. And I've had friends who hadn't even known me for 10 plus years that would often ask if I was okay or if my close family members were okay. But the one person who was supposed to have known me best for 10 plus years didn't really bother asking me how I was doing or considering the state I was in. They just kind of dismissed my feelings, basically. And it got to a point where they basically said they were going to distance themselves from me after I mentioned that first. They unfollowed my Instagram, and I just distanced myself by removing all forms of contact. And that was what made me realize how self-centered this person was, because I felt, looking back, the whole friendship existed for convenience. So I only existed when the other person needed something. And there was no real support system. It was just me putting in most of the work for somebody who didn't really care. Now, in terms of friendships now, I can say that I do have a small group of friends, but these people that I have in my life now are quality people that I can actually trust. So since university, I've met quite a lot of great people that I still keep in contact with, most of which share similar interests to me. And I do have a friend I met in university who is actually high functioning autistic like myself. And with college, I can't really say much. I mean, I did befriend 2 girls in college but lost contact. So one had personal issues and dropped out, and then the other, I guess, had personal things going on in their life, which is understandable because everyone has personal things happening and people's lives do change. But going back to university, I have been keeping in contact with one person in particular who is a Polish girl that I met in my second year, who's a really great friend and is always there to give me advice when I need it, and I'm always there to support her as well, and it's just really great. And if you are listening and you know who you are, I just want to say hi, and I hope you're doing really well. And also, I have met some online friends as well, so I've met quite a few people who share similar interests to me in art, gaming, and even obscure media. And one person that I met online a couple of months ago that I have been keeping in contact with on a regular basis is from Italy, and he is aware of this podcast, and I did say to him that at some point I would mention him, and I'm doing it now. And even though we've only known each other for nearly 3.5 to 4 months, there's like a natural vibe in which we can talk freely without judgment. We can have fun and just talk about whatever, but then there's a mutual understanding when it comes to sensitive issues like mental health. And I mean, we did do a video call, but the only thing was that the connection was bad, although we could see each other. And at some point, I would like to try and organise something where we could have a week off or 2 and just go to each other's home countries and stuff like that, because that would be nice. And if you know who you are and you are listening to this, again, I'm going to say hi, and I know you're going through a lot right now, but I really hope that you're doing okay. Now, to close today's podcast, I do want to say that navigating toxic friendships in general can be really difficult, because you have this real inability to set boundaries. And I think that's kind of my problem with friendships, especially the past, is that I'm somebody who gives people a chance. And sometimes I can give too many chances, which is something I'm trying not to do as much anymore, because I don't want to allow toxic people into my life. Especially because over the past couple of years, I've had to navigate which kind of people I want in my life. And I guess sometimes in the case of setting boundaries, you're expected to go along with what other people want without considering your own needs, which is something that I've become accustomed to over the years. But aside from that, anyone can be toxic. So whether you are neurodivergent or neurotypical, you can find toxic people anywhere. And it's easy for these groups to target vulnerable individuals because they can feed off negative energy in order to benefit themselves. But for me personally, if you are in a situation where you are experiencing toxic behavior, the best thing to do is to distance yourself and cut off contact as soon as you can, because the more you allow toxic people into your life, the more difficult things will be. And I guess this is just my personal opinion, but I find I'm better off having a small group of friends, because that way you have quality people. And I'm a person who prefers quality over quantity, because it's easier to know who you trust, and having quality over quantity is truly valuable in order to have a great life. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to today's episode. Of course, there will be a comment section where you can put in some valuable feedback, and also let me know what you think of today's episode and whether you got anything useful out of it. So in the next 2 weeks, I am going to be recording an episode where I talk about PMS, which relates to the period. So for any autistic women who probably have a difficult time navigating PMS, this episode will be for you. So of course, as always, episodes are released every 2 weeks. And the next episode is going to be released on the 8th of September, which is, as always, on a Sunday, as I release every 2 weeks on a Sunday for consistency purposes, and also because it's easier to work around my schedule. So I hope you've enjoyed listening, and I hope everyone has a great Sunday and also enjoys Bank Holiday Monday. That is, if you are off for the bank holiday. If not, at least try and have a great Monday anyway, and I'll see you back on this podcast on the 8th of September. Bye for now.